Welcome back to Indianomics. Last week we took an in-depth look at how this year and this decade will pan out for India. This week we look at the world economy. What will be the big pluses and the big challenges in 2010 for the global economy? That's our theme on our special column, Economics. And our iconic economist today is Arvind Subramanian, Senior Fellow, Peterson Institute of International Economics and Senior Research Professor, Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Subramanian, thanks much for joining us. First of all, a lot depends on how the US economy might be able to build on the incipient recovery signals we have seen in late 2009. Will 2010 be at least 4 quarters of clear growth in the US?
Yeah, I think just to give a bit of background is that the typical experience in the United States is that, the steeper the decline, the sharper the upswing on the recovery and the faster it is. And this indeed has been a pretty steep decline and one of the worst recessions. But that being said, in this case, the recovery is going to be less smooth and less sharp than in previous ones because of, the problem in the banking system, in the financial system, and the fact of over-indebtedness, especially for households. So the forecast going forward is that between, June of last year, 2009, and the end of this year, the United States would be lucky if it gets about 6 to 7% of growth. That's about an annual rate of about 3.5%. That's a little bit on the optimistic side, but if the economy manages that, I think that would be good news for the world economy.
Well, I know you're not a currency trader, you're an economist, but nevertheless, what we saw over the last, all of 2009 practically, was that the dollar almost became a carry currency. But with the incipient signs of growth and hopes that the quantitative easing will end by, say, February, as the Fed had indicated, the dollar started strengthening. It became a destination for investments, at least on the margins. Do you think that serious dollar weakness is over and done with? Or is this incipient trend a decoy and, the dollar strength is something that will vanish pretty quickly?
Yeah, you see, as an economist, I can say that the current level of the dollar, the dollar has declined substantially over the last 8-9 months, leaving aside little blips here and there. And one can say that, in some kind of fundamental terms, the dollar is kind of close to equilibrium value. Perhaps maybe a little bit more to depreciate, it's about 5% or so. So on that basis, on the basis of fundamentals, one can say that the dollar shouldn't be either certainly not appreciating too much, nor certainly declining too much either. But if anything, it'll be around this level, maybe with a little bit further to go on the downside by about 5%. The one thing you said, which I'm not so sure about, is, one of the things I feel confident about is that the US Federal Reserve is not going to tighten prematurely. Ben Bernanke is a great student of the Great Recession, and one of the mistakes of the Great Recession back in the 1930s was that policy was tightened too prematurely. And that's a mistake that he's unlikely to make. So I don't see monetary tightening happening anytime soon in the United States. And therefore, that's another reason why I don't see the dollar appreciating significantly anytime soon.
Let me get your views on China first. Before I come to the trade aspect in which you take special interest, how do you look at the Chinese growth pace itself? We have two sets of people. One which believes that the Chinese economy is seriously distorted, that it is extremely dependent on US or at least Western growth, and that the pumping of bank credit has actually led to a large amount of artificial capacity creation, unused capacity creation. And there's the other end which believes that China's will probably continue with that 8.5 to perhaps double-digit pace of growth, and that the Chinese leadership will be able to make the necessary changes. Where do you stand? Do you think that the Chinese miracle continues in 2010 and beyond?
I think both of what you said are true. It is both the case that I think the Chinese economy will continue to grow, and also the case that that growth is going to increase or at least not reduce the substantial level of distortions in the economy. So both are true. So the question is that at what point do the distortions come in the way of providing a brake on growth going forward? Now, of course, one of the serious distortions is, of course, the currency itself. So, on the one hand, you've had, as part, what China did was provide a lot of fiscal stimulus, but also provide a lot of cheap credit. So, what's happening is that investment is increasing, and as you said, capacity is increasing. So at some point, there are going to be, too many steel mills, too many buildings, and that's going to put a dampener on growth going forward. But I don't think we're there yet. I think for some considerable time, the Chinese economy will continue to grow quite rapidly. And the real long-term brakes on China will come via demographics rather than really via any kind of distortions blowing up, although that too might happen as we go along. But that blowing up will not seriously affect long-run growth prospects in China.
Actually, I was more interested in getting your views on the currency peg of which China has maintained at 6.82 versus the dollar for over 18 months or 20 months now. That has drawn very sharp criticism from Paul Krugman more recently. What's your own sense that China will give up that peg anytime soon?
Well, I don't think that's likely to happen. I think one can safely say that, China is not going to seriously allow its exchange rate to appreciate either against the dollar or against a wider basket of currencies. I think the Chinese economy is dependent on exports as an engine of growth, and anything that, kind of puts a brake on that engine will entail serious political costs. And those costs, I don't think, are costs that the Chinese authorities are willing to take on in any immediate future. So I don't think China is going to change exchange rate policies. However, I do think that the pressure on China to do so will actually mount. And so I think going forward, this is going to be a serious source of friction in the international economy.
Okay, running out of time, but I do want to get your views on India as well. Do you think a deluge of foreign capital is likely to be one of India or the Indian Central Bank's biggest problems, or is it boons in 2010? And secondly, how would you therefore predict the central bank behavior in terms of rate tightening, at least in the next 6 months?
I think, there's no question that India is going to experience a continued inflow of capital and of magnitudes greater than India can easily manage. So it's going to be a real headache for the RBI because it's going to, a lot of capital is going to come in. And remember that if China doesn't allow its currency to appreciate, that's going to make things much more difficult for us, because one of the ways you cope with this exchange, with the capital flows, is by allowing our own currency to appreciate. But if our currency appreciates and the Chinese currency depreciates, our exports and our domestic industry will suffer. So that's the tension for the RBI. Now the question is, how is it going to respond? It's going to respond, by using a number of policy instruments. I think there'll be a little bit of allowing the currency to appreciate. There'll be a little bit of intervention, like what happened in 2007. It'll buy foreign exchange, and then
Dr. Subramanian, what I wanted from you is to know how the Reserve Bank will generally act on rate tightening, not necessarily in response to capital, but are you expecting that the central bank should start tightening as early as this January credit policy?
Well, I don't know whether it will happen as early as this January, but I certainly think, the process of tightening, not just in terms of signals, but in terms of actual measures, will start with this quarterly review. Whether it takes the form of liquidity tightening or rate increases remains to be seen, but certainly there will be some liquidity tightening going forward from this end of this month onwards.
Well, out of time on the show. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Subramanian. And that's it on Intl Economics this week. See you next week.